All right. Okay, we still have a few people coming in here. All right. All right, so it is 2 after. I will continue to admit people as they pop in. I wanted to thank everybody for checking in with us this morning. We're very excited to bring you this series. Um, this, just a quick background, this did come out of our MMA workshops. We felt that there was so much good information that we just were not able to share with everybody. We wanted to continue the discussion and bring back a few of our speakers. I had the pleasure of listening to Laura's presentation at the MMA convention, and she is a wealth of knowledge, and we're super excited to have her joining us today. I'm going to throw it over to Jen because all the pop-ups are distracting me. So Jen, do you have some opening remarks here for us?
I'm sorry if you hear background noise, but the dumpster, my office is at the back of the building. The dumpster is on the other side of the parking lot, and the garbage truck is here. So sorry about the background noise. Timing is everything, as you know. So the Maine Community Development Association, purpose is to provide forums to increase awareness, foster communication relating to community development issues and concerns, and to provide education and training through workshops. So this is part of that whole background piece. If your organization is not a member of the Maine Community Development Association, send me an email and I will tell you how you can become a member. Anyways, all kinds of fun stuff going on at this point. And I'm not going to take any more time because this is a quick session. I'll turn it back over to Kristen. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Jen, your Sunrise County Economic Council President of the Maine Community Development Association.
Thanks. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. So I'm going to actually probably could have just thrown it straight over to Laura. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself, give us a little background, and then we can go straight into it?
Sure. Hi, my name is Laura Mitchell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition. We are a nonprofit organization that serves the whole state of Maine, advocating for the creation and preservation of affordable housing. We spend a lot of time in Augusta advocating and with our federal delegation. We also commission and share research, and two recent studies that we released are around the cost of construction and why the elements that or why housing costs what it does to build. A lot of it actually is through the cost of permitting and the time and kind of those process issues, zoning, getting approvals, getting environmental approvals, areas that can be made more efficient. And we just released 2 weeks ago a research report around how offsite construction and modular or manufactured housing, different levels of panelization of multifamily housing can reduce costs and increase housing affordability as well. And so I might just start sharing some slides. I'm actually in Orono, Maine, but MOC is really based out of the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition. I will refer to as MOC, is based out of Portland, and we have about 140 member businesses that are a part of the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition. So let me find what to be sharing here. I've been with the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition for about 2.5 years, and am also an independent consultant and have done some housing work and studies and community engagement work through that. So I was sharing a little bit about the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, who we are. We have a vision for all people in Maine to have a home. So please stop and ask me questions as we move through this. You can literally just speak up and interrupt me. You can try and raise your hand, and I'll try and keep an eye out. And I'm sure Kristen and Jen will help out too if you'd prefer to do that. But I'm happy to stop and engage in questions and conversations as we go. I want to share a little bit of background data, and then I'm going to go into some tools and opportunities that communities, planners, coalitions have for increasing housing. So I'll just start by sharing where kind of Maine is at. This was a study that was done in 2023. Our state needs 80,000 new homes by 2030. We are currently building about 7,000 a year. And so we obviously need to be increasing that pretty significantly.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt just for a second. Could I ask folks to please mute if you're not asking a question? Sorry about that. Thank you.
I think I put a couple people on mute that I heard background talking on. Sorry if you were trying to ask a question. So the other piece of this is that not only do we have this huge deficit of homes, but every day, every kind of resident person, housing is a top issue for them, all ages, all incomes, whether it's for themselves. This is not, I'm going to try and stop sharing and then share my the presentation view of my slides. Bear with me 1 second here. That won't work. Okay, well, maybe that's not going to work, and we're just going to have a funky view here. So the need for housing in Maine is truly across the whole state. And so this slide shows the number of new units that are needed. And the 3 areas that the state broke it down on are based upon the workforce development areas. And in total, it's anywhere from 76,000 to 84,300 homes that we need. And maybe we say kind of, how is that possible? A huge part of this is that the rate at which Maine residents are leaving the workforce is much greater than the rate at which we are gaining new residents. School enrollments are down. We know that, and we need new workers to fill those roles that people are retiring from. We're the oldest state in the nation. 30% of Mainers are over 60, and we need new residents to grow our workforce, and they need a place to live. Because a growing economy, like I think everyone in the room would agree, is what we all want to see. We want to see people be successful and have living wages, but they need a place to live. And so that's a key barrier in our state succeeding, is housing. And so the study that the state did broke it down in terms of the number of required workers, and then how many homes are needed for each of those workers. And so you can see here that target jobs housing ratio. You need a little bit, basically about 1 new home for 1 new worker. And so we've got 24,000 new jobs we need to fill. We need about 22,000 new homes for those new workers. Unfortunately, right now, our housing market is just broken. We've got about 1% of a sales inventory. We have one of the lowest rental vacancy rates in the nation. We are not building housing to meet this need at the pace that's required. And the time it takes to get housing projects approved and through the process is very inefficient and long and slow. And so that really is a local issue that all of you play a role in the towns that you live in. If there is housing coming up on your planning board or at a council meeting, show up and support those housing projects, because it is a very challenging process. And so we the other element of this study that was shown was like how many new homes we need to be building, and how many we're actually building. And so we are not hitting that goal. We need about 8,500 to 9,300, but in the last few years, we've been building about 4,000. And so whatever the process is or approaches that's happening in regions around Maine is not working. We are not building enough housing for our need. Part of the problem with this is that affordable housing isn't affordable to build. And that's where the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition has been focused over the last few years, trying to look at subsidies that the state can provide to make the cost of building this housing lower, so it can then be sold or rented at a rate that's affordable for people living in communities. And so we actually did a study that showed that developers actually lose money building properties that are affordable for the majority of our region's workforce. And so that's why those vouchers, those state and federal investments in building housing are so critical, because those properties cost a lot to build, whether it's a single family or a multifamily. And in order to rent them at rates that are affordable, there's a gap in what it costs. So this chart shows that when you're building something for folks that are making more, 120% of the area median income, you can make about $20,000 if you are renting it over time. If you're building it as a single family home for ownership, you're only making about $4,000. And so that's not a huge incentive for a contractor, a builder, or a developer to make $4,000 over the length of time that it takes to develop that property. And so this goes to show why those developments and homes are not being built. They're not a financial incentive to build these.
Laura, real quick, we do have a question in the chat. I know you said to feel free to interrupt.
Yes.
So Charlotte is asking if the new permit data, is the new permit data only available for the entire state, or is it available on the county or town level as well?
I think it's available at the county level now on the housing dashboard. And so there's the DECD has launched their housing production dashboard, which I would encourage you to check out. And there I can share that you can kind of investigate here. It doesn't necessarily show, it'll show what's been, like you can look at the project status in the pipeline, which would be kind of permitted, under construction, completed. And you can look at whether it's a new unit or a preserved unit, and then you can sort by county. So this is a great place to kind of try and keep track of kind of what's going on in terms of development or not. I'm not sure if that answers questions. I will say that I will do a better job responding to questions if they're on time, if they're verbal rather than in the chat. I'm not going to have a great time following the chat while I'm presenting. So feel free to literally interrupt me. Happy to answer and talk. So yeah, that would be the place to look. The other place that's tracking that permit and building data is your county or town. Sometimes they're tracking that on their own. And I don't know who was asking, but those are some places where you could get kind of more up-to-date firsthand data around that. The other piece of it that Maine Affordable Housing Coalition did a little bit of research around is that permit data is not, it's the best the state has, but you need to be keeping in mind that there's about a 15% kind of drop off between what's been permitted and what is actually built. And so, as you can imagine, projects might go forward and get a permit and not actually come to complete fruition. They might not have funding. They might, have some business issue, or that costs might have gone up once they redo costs. So permitting doesn't necessarily mean a unit built, which is one of the reasons why the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition is saying we actually need to bump up those permit numbers in order to meet the 80,000 units. We need more projects permitted in order to hit the 80,000 units of housing than just hit 80,000 permits, because that's not going to get all built.
So I have another question to follow up with that, because that was really interesting. Is that 15% drop off? Do you think that there's a higher drop off at lower market rates as well, or is there data on that? Is it like a 20% drop off for lower market rates and only 10% or 5% for higher market? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it depends. I don't have like actual data around that, and I don't know the permitting process, like even for like a single family home or something, it's not going to be about what the affordability level of it is. And so any data like that isn't necessarily going to totally capture that. With the way the market is right now, it's so broken that one of the few things actually getting built is affordable housing in some ways, because it has the subsidies to cover it and be affordable to complete. It's either that or kind of the more luxury units. And so we're really missing that middle market. 100%, 120% AMI is really tough to build, and so I don't even know that those are getting permitted as much as whether they get built or not.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So as you can see here, the cost gap, as things become more affordable, you go into the negatives. So building something that somebody less than 60% AMI can afford, you're just losing, like $40,000, $30,000 per unit. So no one is going to build that without some level of subsidy. And subsidy can look at a lot of different ways. It can be free land. It can be free infrastructure. It can be TIFs. It can be state Maine housing subsidy, but that is required in order to build this stuff. I'm going to skip over. Well, actually, this is important because this starts to talk about like, okay, who are we talking about that this housing isn't getting built for? Like, how much are they making? And so this shows the income levels and the number of units that are required for each of those income levels. What you'll notice is that even folks that are making a reasonably high amount of money, like that we might say like 100 and 150K, they still need housing across the entire state. So our housing deficit is across all income levels. What needs like a little bit of an asterisk for that, as we start to get into those higher incomes, they can't afford to build a home. Though the people that are making these lower incomes cannot afford to build a home. So we might be lacking the inventory, but there's less agency for those folks, and less choices. So who are some of the people that we're talking about that have less choices? It's people that are vital to our day-to-day lives. It's the people that we need in our lives and the people that we care about in our lives. And I think the quality of life in Maine and the fabric that we have relies on these foundational workers and this labor force. And so when we start to get into NIMBY conversations about them, or their incomes are too low, we don't want them living in our community, which was a real conversation held in the last year in Maine about a housing development, we are talking about critical elements of our workforce and our communities. Pharmacy techs, bank tellers, medical assistants, firefighters, police officers, teachers, nurses cannot afford housing throughout Maine. And when you really think about that, we start to realize we need to be doing whatever we can to produce more housing in Maine for these folks. The quality of life and our health relies on it moving forward, particularly as folks really do start to retire and these positions must be filled by somebody. So what can folks afford? This is an example from Bangor. Data, I can pull this data together. It's just census data for other regions, but you start to see when you're making in that 25 to 50K, you can maybe afford a rental. If it's a home, the data showed an existing home for about 225 was the average from Zillow. That doesn't exist. And so they're not able to afford an existing home. The region's homes are selling for like 350 to 400 plus. And so you have to be making 150K plus to build a new property or really to even afford an existing home. And so we have got to be able to fill the gap for this huge swath of our population that's making in that 25 to 75K range. This starts to show what the rents are and what the home prices are that folks can afford. And I would encourage you to go to the Maine Housing website or the DECD website to delve into that report further. So what do we need? We need senior housing that can be a large property like this in Bangor, and they are very nice. What is getting built? We also need single family home ownership programs, Maine Housing, and we advocated for $20 million of funding to go towards that. So single family homes could be built that are then available for sale at affordable rates. This just breaks down by county, and I know there's folks from around the state here, and maybe you're familiar with this data, but this is good data to get even more familiar with. How many new homes do you need in your county? So sharing that here. And the other piece of this is a big part of this is the level of historic underproduction. And so what you need to pull the layers back on is, okay, why haven't we been producing homes at the level that we need? And now we're in this kind of hole. It's because of zoning. It's because of the process that we go through. It's a lack of engagement of residents at these planning board meetings. It's so this historic underproduction, we have control over at the local level to turn the corner on by supporting housing projects. This starts to get at the change in permitting, and this is maybe what Charlotte was asking questions about, what the permitting needs are, how much we need to increase, you know, between 80 to 95% increases. And so which counties kind of percentage wise need to be building the most new housing? Washington County, percentage wise, needs to increase the most in terms of what it's currently building to what it needs to start producing. That's a huge challenge in a county with a small workforce in that area. And so this also involves talking to youth, getting them into the trades. Again, things that you have control over at the local level. So a second report the state put out was around production goals. It breaks it down by county, what different counties need to start building, what they're building in 2024, and what they need to be building through 2030 to achieve their goals. And this just pulls out Washington County so you can see that, that level of increase that's required there. So what can communities do? So let me pause actually and see if anybody has any questions. This was really the kind of background data to set the framework for, okay, like what do we now do as communities? Any questions? Jim.
Jim Fisher, surprise. Oh no, this is.
Annie, I think we can hear you.
Yeah, hi, Brian Chuth in Eastport. Just that last Washington County slide caught my eye because of the way and the previous one about the way the numbers are rising. Is there an implied population rise that's behind that, or is there something else going on?
No, it is. So we knew that by 2030 we needed. Am I sharing that Washington County slide again?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you have a goal like of 2,200 units basically for Washington County, the state wanted to be realistic that within 1 year, you're not going to ramp up production by, 80%.
Okay.
So like within year 1, let's ramp it up by 30%. Within year 2, let's ramp it up. So it shows underneath what the kind of that ramp up period looks like. Certainly if within 1 year you can all of a sudden meet your production goals, great. But that was the thinking behind that.
Okay.
One of the issues that I was involved kind of in the large committee that put together these goals, but a big concern that I had in these goals was it didn't speak to the affordability level of these units. It just set number of units and number of permits. And the affordability aspect of this is critical. So in Washington County, if you develop a couple, high-end senior retirement communities that nobody from the area can afford to live in and doesn't meet your workforce needs either, you're not actually going to be, addressing your county's housing production issues. So I think, and I think the state was assuming that some of that breakdown would be happening at the more regional level, but that's a really important aspect as planners and as community development folks that you all need to be thinking about is breaking this down further to understand that you actually are meeting the needs of your population and your workforce. What's the income level of the workforce that we need to fill? And so therefore, what's the affordability level of these units we need to produce? Keeping in mind that with folks retiring, they will be, if you're building new senior housing, that there will be people moving out of single family homes, opening those up for other people. But it doesn't mean they're going to sell necessarily at affordable levels. Other questions?
Laura, this is Alan Kratz phoning in from the Blue Hill Peninsula, and I'm intrigued by the slide that you had a minute ago about how to frame the discussion. Was that the next slide you wanted us to discuss? I thought it was very intriguing.
Oh, yes.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead of your narrative, but
Yes, that was next. And I just wanted to pause and see if folks
Okay,
had questions
good.
about the data, but that's definitely what's coming next. What can we do? How can we talk about this? Jim, I think you had a question?
Yeah, and I thought I heard my name before, and I didn't think I had my hand up, but I always have questions. Yeah, I guess there's a policy issue that I'm trying to deal with in Deer Isle as we have a housing opportunity program, and it strikes me that you're showing the biggest deficit not in the low income, but in the middle range and upper middle, and that is typically what you expect, and you expect to see that you build houses at that profitable level, and that relieves some of the pressure on the less expensive older housing, and it filters down. I mean, that's how markets have always worked, and I wonder if that's where we need to focus to some extent. We need to build housing so that other houses, which are now overvalued because people don't have an option, will filter down. Is that, I know that's a policy question, but is that something you're grappling with?
Yeah, I mean, that is true. And we are encouraging that. And that's why, affordable senior housing and senior housing is a big part of this solution. I do think though, like the issue, and I'm trying to find the slide that you're referring to. The issue is that it's not affordable. There's not a financial incentive right now to be building homes. Like, you can still be losing money building homes in this range. Like, it can, on the low end of this, it's tough to build a home for $270,000. I know that sounds insane, but it's true. Once you get the land, once you hook up sewer and water or build a septic and have a home, and so even in this range, and so the other piece of this chart is this covers the entire state. And so you really need to be looking at this at a more regional level, which is why digging into your census data and looking at it at this level can be really helpful, and double checking like what's real. Like the afford an existing home, in theory, someone making 50 to 74,000, according to Zillow, that says your average home price is 225 to 250 in the Bangor area. That's all well and fine. If you look on realtor.com, that doesn't exist. It's like basically laughable. And so, okay, great. They can maybe afford that, but it's not out there. So it doesn't even matter. And when you add up all these other bands of the percent of the population, it's way bigger than these two that can afford kind of the higher level homes. So I think there's an aspect of the market is broken right now. And I hear what you're saying about that, the filtering effect, and there's merit to that, but it doesn't fix everything, if that makes sense. Like, we still need to be extra focused on that affordable stuff because it's not financially viable to build. And there's quite a large population that needs it. Jen?
Now, something else that we need to keep in mind is a good percentage of USDA subsidized housing units that were built, they're reaching the end of the limit on the amount of time they must be maintained as subsidized housing, affordable housing units. So is it 40 years, Laura? Something like that?
Yeah.
So we've got, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we've got a couple of different, elderly and disabled housing properties, whatever you want to call it, and Washington County that are hitting that end of the 40 years. So once that happens, they no longer have to be maintained as subsidized housing units. And they can change income limits, income levels for folks who rent there. So that could be really problematic, and it could just add to the issues that we already have going on. So even though, you know, the middle section really is missing, we need to watch what's happening with the subsidized end of things as well.
Jen, how do I know that? I was about to just ask a question and point out that Eastport, which is only 3.8 square miles, 1,300 people, has at least 70 units of affordable housing. And I was going to kind of go on the previous question about that, but how do I know how many of those might eventually let go?
I think you can get that information from USDA, Brian. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure you can.
All right.
Because I read a newspaper article. That's the only reason I know that,
Okay.
that it's even an issue. But
And if I may ask one question, one other data question before we go on, because of Eastport's kind of odd situation, we're small, you know, we have an airport in that 3.8 square miles, but we're seeing all these same pressures. I'm trying to think kind of a little bit more regionally. The question comes down to, is there Washington County data is kind of hard to make any sense of, because I'm sure we could stick 800 units in the UT somewhere if we had to, but that doesn't actually address the question. Is there anything more granular for me to be able to look at, you know, what's going on in specific communities around here to try to think with data more regionally?
So you can look, I would reach out to kind of your key population centers that have services and water sewer there and talk to them about.
That's us.
Kind
Unfortunately, that's me. And I don't know that. I don't have those numbers.
so Brian, SCEC has applied for Housing Opportunity Program grant to do
Okay.
some housing assessment work in Washington County and in communities that have infrastructure, have village centers, or we'll look at village centers anyway. So we can talk about this later.
Machias and Calais town halls should have some information. Deb Johnson also had a question.
It actually was more of a comment to introduce myself, Deborah Johnson, the director of the Office of Community Development. I manage the Community Development Block Grant Program. So one of the things that we do, we partner with Genesis, Jen Peters, to speak to what you just said about those units coming offline. So in our program statement, we've been giving for the last 2 or 3 years $1 million to help Genesis with their we're calling it the Rural Housing Preservation Program, to do just that thing. Is when these units are coming offline, or potentially for them to go in, acquire them, rehab them if necessary, or to keep them affordable. So that effort is going on and has been going on for the last 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. And Genesis is spearheading that effort. So if you have one that you know is particularly high risk, call Genesis.
Similarly with manufactured housing parks, or trailer parks as they were formerly known, that's another at risk there's a lot of units there too, that when they get sold, the affordability level can change. And Genesis also has partnered to help purchase those and turn them into co-ops. So that's another resource. I'm gonna dig in. I think we just have until 9, right, to start talking about some solutions here. And so language matters a lot when you're talking to housing. And so I've been providing some kind of data behind why housing is so critical. But you got to capture hearts and minds. And there are always going to be people that are against new housing. They're against change, just of any type in a community. But I think some ways to help are to talk about housing affordability, because this is a crisis across all incomes, and housing affordability doesn't create the stigma in people's minds that talking about affordable housing can spark. And so people have an idea of who lives in affordable housing, and there can be judgments and stigma around that. But when we talk about housing affordability, I think everybody can kind of relate to that. My costs are going up. My kid can't find a place to live. My kid is living in my basement. My restaurant or coffee shop is understaffed and is closing because those workers can't find housing that's affordable. Another important language change is to talk about homes versus housing units. And everybody can kind of get warm and fuzzy about a home, and everyone deserves a home. Housing units feels very kind of abstract and takes away from that safety, security, comfort, coziness that everyone needs in their life to be healthy. And so using the term home matters. Homes is economic development. It's as important as roads. It's as important as your water and sewer. It's as important as electricity. Homes are a foundational part of economic development for your region. Homes are where jobs go home to sleep. If you want more jobs in your region, you want people to be making better money, they need homes. Homes equals health. You can't be healthy when you are constantly anxious and insecure about where you're going to sleep at night and whether it's going to be warm and you can afford the electricity. And there's a lot of data also around new people and homes in your community is a benefit. People will complain, it's going to mess up my schools, it's going to create traffic, I'm going to be paying more taxes. That's not true. There's actual data that every new home, whether it's rental or for purchase, creates about a $1,700 tax benefit for each of those. That's going to vary slightly by each community, but no matter what, it's a net positive. You want to keep businesses open. You want to keep your school open in your community. You need new homes. You need this positive benefit that they bring with them. So what can communities do? A key
Laura,
partner.
can I just interrupt? This is Alan Kranzik, and I want to jump
Yeah.
in on that last slide. I really like that. If you can go back to that slide.
Yep.
I really like the idea where jobs go home to sleep, and also go home to shop, and hearts, minds, and dollar signs. Could you elaborate on the 1710 figure at the bottom? What's the basis? How do we explain that to people in our towns?
I can shoot the study around that was
Okay.
built off of, and you could probably insert some numbers that might be relevant for your region or whatever. But there's been a number of studies. I just pulled that one out. So, but yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So what can communities do? I think a big part of this is engaging diverse stakeholders. And so MOC right now is actually working on a statewide pro-housing campaign in partnership with chambers and business community leaders. And Vermont actually just launched a new coalition with business and hospital leaders to say we need to build homes. They need the workers. They have resources. If a business leader shows up at a planning board meeting or a council meeting, or talks to developers about the importance of homes in their community, people listen in a different type of way. So they are a critical resource in communities to engage. Realtors, they market your community, talk to them. Understand what they're seeing, what they need, what people coming into your community are asking for, what the barriers are that they're seeing. Latch onto those and work on those. Builders and developers, again, what do they need to help build more homes in your community? What's missing? What's difficult? What's taking a long time that's making it more expensive to build? Schools, I know I'm on the Orono Comprehensive Plan Committee right now, and one of the most vocal people on that committee is the principal of our high school, saying our school and all the programs that it offers are not sustainable unless we have more families moving into our community. We need more homes to make that happen. And there's like 10% of homes in Orono that have children in them. And so if you have some of that data, talk to your schools. They know this. They have compelling information to share and to help you do planning about what type of housing you need and how to make your community successful. Elected officials are decision makers. You want your planning board members to understand how dire this issue is. So when one or two people show up and complain, they understand that it needs to happen anyway. There's always going to be one or two voices, maybe 5 or 6 voices against something, but for the greater good of the thousands of people, planning boards need to be supporting projects. Your local COG, many of you are here, municipal staff, and more. And I actually am referring here to NMDC for their resources. Another important element is what that communities can do is assess what housing they have in their community, from crisis homelessness all the way through kind of, is there transitional housing? Is there affordable housing? And one thing, there's legislation that right now, the budget for the state limits GA spending on housing for 3 months. And I think communities are, helping people that might otherwise be homeless access GA to pay for their housing. A lease can't be signed off of a 3-month commitment. And so thinking about what that means in your community in terms of, are people going to be homeless if they don't have access to that, is part of this continuum. And understanding where are the gaps. There are hub coordinators for different areas. There's McKinney-Vento resources for youth that the state has. There's shelters, warming centers. It's freezing right now. Is there a place for people to go day or evening to be warm? Because even if somebody does have a home, it doesn't mean it's warm. That's critical. So understanding the resources, we've talked about how the financial resources are so important. Get familiar with Maine Housing's resources. I think for many of you, the rural affordable rental housing program is something that would be very applicable in your communities. It's for 6 to 18 unit developments. They've gone in Madison, in Newcastle. There's projects proposed in Holton, all kinds of small communities, but you need a developer that can do that. And so befriending any possible builder or developer in your community can help. Or if you need connections to developers, reach out to me. We have a number of developers in our network, and I'm happy to make those connections for you. Genesis Fund provides technical assistance for these programs. Encourage you to reach out to them, understand what Genesis offers. The Maine Redevelopment Land Bank is new. I think they're working in Millinocket or East Millinocket right now. They are working in rural areas and throughout the state. If you have land that can be redeveloped for housing or even commercial, whatever that might be, they have resources and support to figure out how that can happen. Municipalities play a key role. They can make financial investments, land donations. They can change their zoning. Think village centers, allowing housing that looks like our village centers. Basically, there's probably the number of towns in Maine that allow that. I can probably count on one hand. Towns have to be changing setbacks, changing parking requirements, changing density. So smaller, denser village development can start to expand. That's where water and sewer is. It's cheaper to build when it's denser and it's closer together. allow residential and commercial and mixed use, provide tax increment financing, TIFs. That's where you delay receiving taxes off of a project for a certain number of years. It's like a really great tool that towns have to provide financial incentives to projects. Fast track approval processes, do pre-approve certain type of developments in certain areas so developers don't need to go through the process. And tell towns can be some of the employers in communities that are in the most dire need of employees. This housing is for their workforce. It makes your taxes go down if the town's employees have an affordable place to live. Just critical talking point there. And so some more opportunities for municipalities in terms of building missing middle, public-private partnership opportunities, ways that you can invest at a low cost and to increase density. Zoning adjustments, allow triplexes, allow residential and commercial and agricultural. I know like in Turner, one of the chicken farms wanted to put in employee housing in their agricultural area. The town said no, and the chicken farm has closed. So we've got to get more flexible in what we allow and what we think of for housing, because businesses are not able to thrive or exist without housing for their employees. Manufactured housing, the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition advocated for manufactured housing to be allowed in all single family zones, but can you zone for a manufactured housing park that is very dense? So thinking about what that looks like and where in your community you would want that. Provide incentives, density bonuses, reduce parking, fund infrastructure projects with zones, or delay, or just kind of provide low-cost loans for that, for a development. That streamlining of permitting, pre-approved building types that a developer could just pick from, reduces those costs for them and makes it more affordable to build. Public housing for land, typo there, or long-term leases on land, low interest loans, or even guaranteeing loans are ways to kind of create these public-private partnerships. A TIF to create a housing trust fund, which could then be used to subsidize housing development, is a tool that towns have. And then in terms of really rural areas, opportunities that you have, maybe when there's not water or sewer, there are alternative infrastructure options. There's decentralized or alternative water sewer systems where you cluster septic when you have smaller homes together and they share a septic, rainwater harvesting, gray water systems. There's lots of ways that you can allow for denser development without really expensive infrastructure developments. Cluster housing is a really important thing to be thinking about. Tiny homes on really small plots of land without extensive infrastructure. And then just wrapping up here, the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, our policy priorities going into this state's legislature are to expand the state historic rehabilitation tax credit, old schools, old Grange halls. How do we turn those into housing or mixed use? It's with this state historic tax credit. So we want to expand that so it can be leveraged more efficiently and long-term. A bond to subsidize the building of more affordable housing and reduce regulatory barriers to housing. rethink the appeals process for approvals, set timelines around how long these processes take. So building housing can be cheaper and faster. We are also looking at supporting modular, and how can we do that through providing incentives for Maine-based modular builders to actually be building these properties statewide and more efficiently, kind of tie them in. So there's the Maine Housing Rural Affordable Rental Housing Program and their home ownership program that both can leverage modular and there are projects that have, particularly with KBS, which is a Maine-based Paris, Maine modular builder. It is fast to be putting up properties using this modular development, which means it's cheaper. And so we support that. So those are some key priorities we have going into this legislature, along with, we'll be supporting others as well, but these are the ones that we're driving. We also have federal policy priorities that I want to leave a few moments at the end here for questions. Thank you for listening. Anyone have questions? I've overwhelmed everybody. Okay, sorry.
No, Laura, so I just, for one, want to say that was an amazing, amazing amount of information that you did give us. I know I'm overwhelmed, but like in a super good way. Your solutions I thought were great options. I know that there is somewhat of a push to work with, to bring it down to the municipalities. And I definitely appreciate that you mentioned that. We'd like to see municipalities work more on an RFP basis so that they're taking ownership. By we, I mean me. I'm not speaking for MCDA or anybody else.
Yeah.
But get that ownership into the hands of the municipality so they can direct that vision and achieve, pretty much everything you said in your slides.
So and just something else to consider. It was a lot of information. The presentation will be going up on the Maine Community Development Association website, along with the recording of this session. So, if you want to look back on something, you can find that info at maincda.com.
Org.
Thank you.
Under the training tab. And I did put a link in the chat if anybody wants to access that.
And Genesis was mentioned a couple of times today, and as Kristen put in the chat, John Egan from Genesis is the presenter next time around, February 5th. So come on back.
Any
Thanks,
questions?
this was very helpful.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Laura. It was a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you all, and certainly feel free to reach out. I'll share my slides and contact information.
Right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great morning.
Thank you.
See you all in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.